Hey everybody. This week we're going to be taking a look at a Gardevoir deck from the RS to PK format. I played this deck in the tournament last weekend and I ended up in second place. I lost to James Arnold in the finals playing the Net EX. So I wanted to break down the deck and then kind of talk a little bit about my tournament run and how everything went down. Starting off here, I absolutely love Gardevoir as, I would say even just a Pokemon in general. For whatever reason in the TCG, whenever Pokemon decides to print Gardevoir, they seem to make it a great deck. You've got Gardevoir Glade in 2008. You've got Gardevoir in 2004. Gardevoir in 2010 too. Even after the deck got severely nerfed after 2008, it still did phenomenal in the 2010 season. And the RS to PK format is going to be no exception for Gardevoir as well. In 2007, Gardevoir had some parts to it. Gardevoir EX was very good. The Delta Species Gardevoir was very good. But it really didn't mesh very well with the format in general. And it didn't really get to see the level of play that it probably should have. So when you come into the RS to PK format and you're combining some different years, essentially the sets from 2005, 2006, 2007, and you get to see some interesting formats, some interesting matchups, and Gardevoir, which went from really strong core components in 2007, not really seeing the play due to the format, to being a top deck. Starting off here, we play 4 copies of Rolts. We play the Delta Species Rolts because we want to make sure we have that synergy with Holon's cast form. We play 2 copies of Kirlia, also the Delta Species for the same reasoning. Next up, we play 2 copies of Gardevoir EX, 2 copies of Gardevoir for Delta Species, and then 1 copy of Gardevoir from Emerald. Each Gardevoir brings a little piece to the table, and when you put them all together, it just gives you a ton of different options. Gardevoir EX's in Prison, just being able to shut off the opponent's powers and bodies can be absolutely devastating to him. It's also a fire type, and at 150 hit points, it's going to stick around for a while. The attack for 80 damage, and then it lets you, one of the most impressive things about the attack is that it lets you move an energy back to the bench. So this kind of helps you conserve energy, especially if you know that Gardevoir EX is about to get knocked out. And it also synergizes really well with Gardevoir, which lets us move, once per turn we can move an energy around. Gardevoir is also a Psychic and Metal type, so we get some pretty good type coverage here as well. Black Magic also lets you hit for some absolutely amazing damage numbers. Gardevoir from Emerald, you're not going to be attacking with it very often, but that built-in potion for the power can really mess with a lot of your opponent's math, especially if you're able to get something back to the bench and then use Heal Dance on it multiple turns in a row before you send it back to the active spot. I went with the 101 Pidgeot line. I went with the Delta Species Pidgey. Once again, so we have that synergy with Holon's cast form. And then I played a 1-1 Porygon 2 line. You can make some arguments to play a thicker Pidgeot line in the deck. The reason that I split them here is because Porygon 2 is a lot easier to set up, and then the Pidgeot line is, and then at the same time, a lot of the times I would find that while being able to search my deck for any card is an absolutely broken power, it doesn't always get you out of a low hand size. So later on in the game, when your opponent's adminning you to 1 or 2 cards, it's great to be able to search for 1 card, but sometimes you need to refill that hand, find a supporter, find something you don't want to quick search for, like an energy drop or something like that. I would say, and I won't say all the games, I would say in a good percentage of long drawn out games, I would get both Pidgeot and the Porygon 2 out as long as I didn't prize any of the components on it. 3 copies of Holon's cast form. I would like a 4th in the deck, but I just split it with Jirachi as far as our openers here. The Jirachi is really good and I think very needed. We play so many thin lines in the deck and we play so many different techs that sometimes the deck can struggle to get set up. And while Holon's cast form is great, if we don't open with it, we don't always want to spend the energy to retreat our active, and then spend another energy to Delta Draw on the following turn. Sometimes we don't have that energy. So this is where Jirachi comes in, where it's just really easy, where we can get that off our first Mentor, and then just start Wishing Star to set up. 1 copy of Polon's Magnemite. We want to make sure that we have that searchable energy off the Mentor. 1 copy of Celebi EX. This is becoming a lot more popular, I would say, in Gardevoir recently. You also see it very commonly in LBS decks. It's just really good when you play so many thin lines in your Pokemon lineup, your trainer lineup, just to be able to come in and be able to get one of those cards back. So essentially all your 1-ofs turn into 2-ofs, or even in certain situations, like when we play 3 Windstorms, that essentially gives us access to a 4th Windstorm. I play 1 Rayquaza EX. One of the things about the deck is everything is so energy heavy. All the big attacks take at least 3 energy to do. Rayquaza EX allows us to attack for just 2 energy or 1 energy if we're behind. It also lets us be able to hit things on the bench. Sometimes if, 80 damage isn't enough to knock it out, they get it back to the bench. Rayquaza EX will let us come in and snipe it. Next up, we play, going into our trainer lineup here, we play 4 copies of Polon Transceiver, 3 copies of Polon Mentor. Just getting that good start for the deck is so essential. I did bump up the Mentor count to 3. I know there is quite a lot of other spots in the deck where I'd love to have a 2nd copy of something or a 3rd copy of something, but I just feel that putting that extra spot in the Mentor into the Holon Mentor is just well worth it to make sure that we're getting those strong openings. I would say that you can make an argument to replace one of the Mentors with the Lynette's Net Search. That way you're able to have another way to search out that Rayquaza in matchups where you do need it. The 3 Mentor is just slightly more consistent. In some situations, it's nice to have that discard, and then at the same time, too, in those rare games where you do prize 2 Holon Mentor, it is nice to have that 3rd. 1 Holon Scientist, 1 Holon Adventurer, and then 1 Holon Researcher. You can make an argument to play a 2nd Researcher, but I went with a lower Researcher count to fit in the Celios network. 4 copies of Rockets Admin. This deck is going to have so many come from behind turns and so many back and forth games. It is essential to have that 4 copies of Admin in here. Actually, I would say about every single deck in the RSPK format should be playing 4 copies of Rockets Admin. 4 copies of Rare Candy. 3 copies of Windstorm. We don't play any stadiums in the deck, but we want to be able to counter Desert Ruins, Cursed Stone, Crystal Beach, Cessation Crystal. Just about every sort of counter tool or counter stadium in the format will hurt us. So we want to be able to make sure that we can answer them and answer them consistently. 2 copies of Celios Network. Celios Network allows us to search out stuff that Holon's Researcher doesn't, such as our Porygon 2 line or our Pidgeot. And once we're able to set up our consistency engines here, then everything in the else in the deck should just start flowing. 2 copies of Steven's Advice. 2 copies of Steven's is just kind of my go-to in the format. I like to be able to either quick search it out when my opponent has a full bench to draw 6, and in just in normal situations, just having that a little bit of built-in straight draw, I think, is just so strong. 2 copies of Warp Point. I tested around with 1. I didn't like it a whole lot. I bumped it up to 2. Going along here with 3 copies of Windstorm. This also allows us to, it gives us a total of 5 outs of Cessation Crystal. And in a lot of situations, if we're able to get a power off, whether that's a backup or a quick search off with Pidgeot, or even just being able to move an energy around with Gardevoir, we can get ourselves out of that situation where the Cessation Crystal is hurting us. 2 copies of Pokemon Retriever. We play so many thin lines in the deck, it is absolutely essential that we can get them back and get them back consistently. 2 copies actually feels a little bit light in the deck, and there's been several occasions where I'll actually have to Celebi for a 3rd copy. The one thing that, I guess one piece of advice I'd kind of give on it is really watch your Holon's Cast Forms. They are absolutely essential to the deck, so a lot of the time I will try to make sure that I'm sending 1 or 2 Cast Forms back, whatever else I'm sending back. The other thing, and I'm going to say this kind of loosely, it's not a hard and fast rule, but in certain situations, playing 2 copies of Pokemon Retriever in the deck actually makes it stronger for some of your Pokemon to end up in the discard pile. So, for example, or something that comes up, I would say kind of commonly, is I would actually, if it was the right call for the situation, I would discard Pidgeot off a Hold-On Mentor or a Hold-On Scientist Adventure or whatever. And then I would always have that Pidgeot in the discard pile. And since I had that Pidgeot in the discard pile, anytime I had a Pokemon, I knew I could get it back with that Pokemon Retriever, and the Pidgeot would actually be stronger in the discard pile than it would be in the deck. Next up, we play a 1 copy of Strength Charm. The main reason I added Strength Charm to the deck is that Gardevoir EX hitting for 80 would make it very hard to knock out Sneasel EX, and Banette EX were 2 of the bigger ones. It also allows for some really nice black magic damage. James Arnold was actually the one that suggested it to me, so shout out to him on that. It played really, really, really well. There's just a lot of different situations where you'll just come up 10 shy from knocking something out, and then being able to search it out or even get a second copy back with Celebi is absolutely huge. I played 1 copy of POW Hand Extension in the deck. In theory, POW should be really good. A free gust of wind or the ability to move in energy is just obviously really strong. In the actual playing, it was okay. It didn't come up nearly as much as I thought it would. I would say one of the main reasons I was playing it was for the mirror match in particular, but even though I played several mirrors, I never really felt like I got a lot of great value out of it. If I was going to cut a card from the deck, I would say probably the POW Hand Extension is the most cuttable card right now. Lastly, for the energy, we play 4 Delta Rainbow, 3 Warp Energy. I played the extra copy of the Delta Rainbow versus the Warp Energy, mainly just for the Rayquaza. That was kind of the deciding factor for it. I also don't want to miss attacks on the Gardevoir, or I guess on either of the Gardevoirs, just from not being able to find a Fire or Psychic or Metal Energy. And then having that Rayquaza EX, in matchups where we need that Rayquaza, it is just absolutely essential that we are able to attack with it when we need to. 3 Warp Energy, and then the second copy of Warp Point I added made me feel a little bit better about only 3 Warp Energy. Between the two, we had 5 in the deck, and it played really well. I had no issues with it. To give a quick breakdown of how the tournament went for me, in the first round I played against Dragtrode. It was actually against Jason Klaczynski, and there's 2 different Dragtrodes variations that are pretty popular right now. The first is where you max Sneasel EX and play a lot around that, and the other variation is you play a lot of single prize attackers, and you put a lot more emphasis on attacking with Dark Dragonite. And you're just trying to trade that 1 prize for 2 prizes throughout the course of the game. Jason played the second variation of the deck. I think that matchup is a little bit stronger for me because I don't have to worry about drag-offs all the time, coming from Sneasel. The game went pretty well for me. It was close throughout the entire game. I was able to get some really good imprisons off on his Dark Dragonites and Dark Electrodes that really slowed him down. And then in the later stages of the game, I was able to hit him with a Rockets admin, and he wasn't able to draw anything off of it. And from there, I was just able to pull ahead and win the game. The other big factor in it was the Gardevoir from Emerald. Being able to use that Heal Dance every single turn really put me in a good spot. And there were several situations where I was changing 2-hit knockouts into 3-hit knockouts. Or there was another course in the game where I was actually able to get a Gardevoir EX back to the bench and use 3 or 4 Heal Dances on it to completely remove one of his attacks. In the second round, I played against Banette EX with the Lunatone variation of it. This game did not go as well for me. He started off really quickly. I will be upfront and say that I made a misplay somewhere in the middle stages of the game. I think he had a Crystal Beach in play, and I completely forgot about it, and I went to attack with a Holin's Cast form. And from there, the game just went downhill for me. If I hadn't made that mistake, I would have been in a really bad spot, but I think I would have had a small chance to come back and win that game. Third round, I played against a Mucky X Weezing deck. I'm not entirely sure what the Weezing was for, because I didn't see... If I was going to play a Weezing variation, I think I would have maxed Curse Stone, but he still went with the Team Aqua's Hideout. Mucky X is actually a much harder matchup than Medicham EX because the Mucky X will shut off Gardevoir's Imprison, so you don't have that ability to imprison the Muck. The game started off really well for him. He gets the turn 2 Mucky X. Thankfully, Muck doesn't do a ton of damage in the early game until you get 3 energies under it. And I remember the game coming down to, essentially, I was able to get a Gardevoir EX out and attacking with it. And then through that, I was able to conserve my energy. One of the nice things about playing against Mucky X is, since they always go up in prizes very quickly, a lot of variations of the deck don't play POW hand extension. And his flips with ER2 were okay, but he missed, I think, 1 or 2 ER2 flips that really helped me out. Towards the end of the game, I basically finished it off by just riding Celebi EX and using the attack where EXs can't hurt you on the following turn. He didn't really have a good answer to that and wasn't able to play around it, so I won from there. The 4th round was against another Gardevoir deck, and this was one where basically he put his Gardevoir EX into play first, and then I got mine into play, and then I imprisoned his Gardevoir. And that put him, whoever gets that first imprison off on the other Gardevoir EX is setting way ahead in that matchup, because any single time he put a power into play, I was able to put an imprison counter on it. And since his Gardevoir EX already had an imprison counter on it, he wasn't able to do that to mine at all. So throughout the entire game, I had all of my powers I could use, and he had absolutely none. From there, the game just played out. We were trading prizes back and forth, and because I had all the abilities, I ended up winning. Round 5 was Medicham EX and Evolutions. Medicham EX is a really favorable matchup. The only way they have to beat you is they have to get you to the late game, evolve a Medite into a Medicham EX that does not have an imprison counter on it, POW something active, and then admin you to a low hand size and hope you just don't draw anything. Thankfully, that's not how the game played out. I was able to get imprison counters off on his Medicham EX very early. He drops a second Medicham EX. I was able to do the same thing. And then in the later stages of the game, I was able to use Gardevoir, the Delta Species Gardevoir, and the weakness just to ride through or power through the Medicham EXs. Round 6. I played against Bennett EX Lunatone. This was the same opponent as round 2. This game went a little bit, obviously went better for me. I was able to so basically what it was is he got a really fast start on me. And then I was able to knock out a Bennett EX with Gardevoir, Strength Charm, and then throw Holdland's Cast Form back to a second Gardevoir EX on the bench. He knocks out that Gardevoir EX. I bring out the second one, Celebi for the Strength Charm, and then hit him for, I think I had an admin in there too, hit him for 90, knocking out the second Bennett EX. And I think at that point the prize counts were 2-2, and he had nothing else in play. He only had 1 energy under a Lunatone, and the Lunatone wasn't going to do much for him. So I was able to basically just take 2 more prizes, as he just really wasn't able to find anything at all with a low hand size. Finals, I played against James Arnold. He also played Bennett EX with the Lunatone. This was another one where I just wasn't really able to get anything going. He got a very early Bennett on me and was just able to take a lot of quick prizes. I did knock out 1 Bennett EX, but at that point he was so far ahead and I didn't have the response when he came up and knocked out my Gardevoir EX. So I lost that one, and final record it was, I ended up 5-2 for the tournament. The deck played really well overall. I will say I made a couple of little mistakes in Swiss, so I definitely learned some things from the tournament. But overall, it was a really good tournament. So one of the last things that I want to cover is just some general playing advice for the deck, and then some changes I made to the deck after the tournament. So starting off here, Imprison wins games. This is why the deck is a deck. Being able to use Gardevoir EX to shut off your opponent's powers is game defining. One of the things to really look for is just make sure that you're maximizing your opportunities to use Imprison, and then that you're prioritizing the most important targets. And there's going to be a lot of situations where maybe you even have to bring Gardevoir EX into the active spot before you can attack with it, just to get that imprison marker on the opponent's Pokemon a turn or 2 turns sooner. So something like, being able to imprison a Pidgeot, or just denying a quick search or denying 2 quick searches is going to be so impactful to slowing your opponent down and making sure they can't get that set up to really contest your board in the long term. Next up is energy management. I would say this is the second most important factor with the deck, is just make sure that you're conserving your energy properly. One of the biggest downsides of the deck is that you're relying on single energy attachments and that you need 3 energy to attack. Now, the deck has a lot of ways to manage energy, with Gardevoir EX being able to send it back to the bench, and then with the Delta Species Gardevoir being able to move it around. And one of the things is I would say in most games and situations, your energy is almost more valuable than your actual Pokemon. So just make sure that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're not leaving, your one big Gardevoir EX active with all your energy on it, and that you are able to bounce energy back to the bench. And then also make sure, especially if you're ahead in prizes, and you're going to be vulnerable to a POW hand extension, that moving the energy back, you're not creating a super compelling target on the bench too. So like if you move a Castform back to a Delta Species Gardevoir, and then they're able to POW up the Gardevoir and then knock it out, taking out not only your ability to move energy, but also a Holen's Castform along the way. Sometimes it's almost better just to move that Holen's Castform back to a Roltz or something else on the bench, where then they kind of have to decide, do we knock out the Gardevoir EX? Do we knock out the Roltz and get the energy? Or do we knock out the Gardevoir and try to stop his ability to move the energy around? So there's just a lot of little thought process with that. But the main thing is just don't give your opponent a really, really easy way to wipe out your main Pokemon and your energy at the same time. Know your prizes. I know this is a pretty general rule, and then this is important for any deck in Pokemon. But with this deck in particular, when you're playing so many single copies of cards and so many single copies in your Pokemon lineup, it's really, really important that, when you're playing that first hole on Mentor and you're grabbing, let's say, a Pidgey, that you're making sure your Pidgeot's not prized. Or if you're playing in a matchup where, let's say, Strength Charm is going to be hugely impactful, that you're not making plays based on around being able to quick search for that Strength Charm or get that Strength Charm out, and then you find out your Strength Charm's prized. Planning out your turns. Once again, I know this is very general advice for Pokemon in general, but I feel like with this deck in particular, you've got to be able to plan out your turns, like know where your win condition is and then how you're going to reach it. And this kind of goes along with the energy management section, just making sure that you have that path to victory mapped out. You know how many, like, for example, in a game, let's say you're going to need 2 copies of Strength Charm. Okay, are you sure the Strength Charm's not prized? Are you sure that the Celebi X isn't prized? Are you making sure to save the Celebi to go ahead and be able to use that Strength Charm a second time? Is there maybe a situation even where you have to let the Celebi get knocked out to Pokemon Retriever it back to get a 3rd Strength Charm? And just make sure that you have that game plan. You know what you need to do to win that matchup, what cards are important in that matchup, knowing they're not prized, and then going ahead and implementing that game plan. And I think with some of the other decks in the format, let's say like the Arcanine deck we covered last week, that these planning out the entire course of the game is much easier or much simpler, or even less impactful than doing it with a deck like this that requires such careful playing and management. What cards are important? This is just understanding what cards you need in certain matchups. Strength Charm is a great example of this, where in certain matchups, like against Dragonite, against Benetti X, like the Strength Charm is highly, highly, highly impactful in that game. But against more general things like, let's just say a Flygon deck, for example, that Strength Charm might come up, but it's, you also don't know that it's going to be an absolute must to get to your win condition. So just kind of understanding what cards you need in that matchup, and then making sure that those are available to you. And lastly, it's going to be that Celebi EX. Really make sure that is that Celebi going to be important in this matchup? and then you're making sure you leave yourself room to play around with that Celebi. Like we've talked about, I know I've said this a couple of times, but Strength Charm in particular, let's say you know you need that Strength Charm, you know you're going to need multiple copies of that Strength Charm. Are you making sure that you're not wasting your Celebi on something else? Are you making sure that Celebi, you're leaving yourself that open bench spot to play that Celebi down? And just understanding how that Celebi is going to affect the matchup that you're in particular. And the answer might be that the Celebi doesn't affect that matchup at all, but you need to understand if it does and how it will affect that matchup. And then lastly, after tournament changes, the only change I made to the deck is I dropped the POW hand extension and then I added a Scramble Energy. The thought process from this is both of these cards are play from behind cards. Neither one is exceptionally good if you're even or ahead on prizes. And the biggest weakness I found for the deck, especially in tournament play, was that I was so heavily reliant on that one energy drop per turn. And that Scramble Energy is going to give me a little bit more freedom to be able to bring up a Gardevoir Delta, attach a Scramble Energy, and then attack for a lot of damage without making a huge investment. And being able to do that, or even being able to do that multiple times with, say, Celebi EX, is going to be incredibly impactful in the game. Or it could allow me to get a knockout or get an attacker up without needing as much of an investment as I would if I had to manually drop 3 energy on that Gardevoir to attack. Alright, so that's going to go ahead and wrap things up here. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you like this content and you want to see more content like this in the future, I would hope you'd consider liking the video and then subscribing to the channel. It helps me out considerably, and feel free to leave a comment down below. I love to get some interaction, get some good discussion going, and I make it a point to try to answer every comment that somebody puts. So thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.